In this life, what do you treasure the most?
Security is essential for your entire way of life.
What do you fear the most?
Obviously terrorism.
The thing that's the scariest, the thing that I find the most immediate, is the threat of our democracy dying because of foreign actors.
Should we be worried about democracy in the UK? I think we should be super worried about democracy in the UK, I really do.
Freedom and democracy are hard won and easily lost.
What are you prepared to do to protect it?
Price of security is eternal vigilance.
When one invents the wheel, one doesn't uninvent the wheel.
We need light in dark times.
This documentary looks at the main security challenges facing us today and the role of NATO in keeping Europe secure. We ask whether deterrence, the strategy that kept the peace for 70 years, is still relevant in an age of cyber attacks and hybrid warfare. We examine when and why relations between Russia and the West deteriorated, and whether we're now living through a new Cold War.
We took our eye off the ball.
It was pretty squalid. It was like something out of a kind of bad version of John le Carré, actually, but without the superior dialogue and the trench coats.
We also look at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, its purpose, problems, and prospects. Is NATO a relic of the Cold War? Is it obsolete and brain dead? Or is it more important than ever?
You know, you don't go round in your village announcing to every burglar that the burglar alarm on your house is no longer working. So please, burglars, come and try to get into my house. I mean, I don't think that's very wise to do politically.
For the purposes of this documentary, we interviewed diplomats and senior officials at NATO, as well as people who worked at NATO in the past.
Once my grocer in Brussels said, "Oh, you work at NATO, what's your job?" And I said, "I wait to be attacked. That's my job."
We also interviewed foreign correspondents, defense consultants, historians, and security experts from leading think tanks.
We need to learn from our mistakes. I think, unfortunately, people in many countries were very quick to say the Cold War was over. And a memorable phrase that was used to me by an official in Germany was, "We forgot how to deal with Russia."
We also spoke to a group of students studying global current affairs at Bournemouth University in order to hear their perspectives on NATO.
I would go with alliance, military, cooperation, bureaucracy, waste.
Security. Nothing else comes to mind. Yeah, I think that's it. This is awkward.
When I was travelling and decided I was going to do this interview, lots of people saying to me, what is NATO? What do they actually do? Because they had no idea what they do.
Along with those students, we attended NATO's summit in London in December 2019 and witnessed an historic moment for the organisation. As the alliance celebrated its 70th anniversary, personal tensions between leaders, as well as fundamental questions about budget contributions, the role of the United States in Europe, Turkey's campaign in Syria, and disagreements over how to deal with Russia, created a sense of existential crisis.
The instinctive impulse of politicians is to tell me and other journalists that things are fine. You need to get beyond that to actually get real about what is happening, the new challenges, and how NATO may have to adapt and evolve and change to cope with a changing world.
While filming for this documentary, we were reminded that the security landscape is shifting, that threats are much closer to home.
Yeah, I actually wanted to excuse my crudeness, but there's actually been an incident right now on London Bridge.
Seems quite unusual to see an armed policeman. Do you know any more details about it?
I do.
I think about stuff like that a lot, all the time. And I think it does affect people personally.
This documentary is divided into 7 parts or chapters. These can be watched as standalone videos or as one coherent narrative. The first chapter introduces the concept of deterrence and explains why it's so crucial to our security and daily life. In chapter 2, we look at nuclear deterrence, how and why NATO was formed, and what its role was during the Cold War. Chapter 3 looks at the period just after the Cold War, when NATO was forced to reinvent itself by welcoming the new democracies of Central and Eastern Europe, and by engaging in campaigns in the Balkans and the Middle East. This is when relations with Russia begin to deteriorate. In Chapter 4, we examine whether the West is facing a new Cold War, and we ask what's driving Russian President Vladimir Putin. In Chapter 5, we take a trip to London for the 2019 NATO leaders meeting, witnessing an historic moment that will shape the future of the alliance and of Europe as a whole. We capture young people's questions and concerns and put them directly to NATO leaders and experts. We also identify the key tensions and issues dividing leaders. We ask whether this is another family squabble or a more serious existential crisis. In Chapter 6, we ask whether deterrence is relevant in the 21st century and how we can effectively deal with threats such as cyber attacks and fake news campaigns. Finally, Chapter 7 looks at the future of NATO. Can Europe go it alone, or should the US and Canada remain part of the European security architecture? What should NATO leaders do, and what should the public do?
The coronavirus outbreak has made clear that many of the challenges we face are too great for any one nation or organization to face alone.
If NATO going forward isn't going to be what it was in the past, we need to think very carefully about what is going to be our collective effort to make the world as safe as it can be for democracy, for freedom, for our sorts of values.